In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the effects panel of the Advanced Material Editor. Alright, so in this lesson, let's go ahead and open up the Material Editor and make sure that you're under the effects panel. And the first thing that we're going to take a look at in here is going to be the lighting section here. Now the lighting section, you'll notice, has diffuse and ambient, and these two options need to work very closely together with one another. Now diffuse is going to pertain to the light as it hits the color of an object. So this is the direct lighting. Now ambient is going to be lighting from indirect sources, or the ambience of the entire level or environment. Okay. Now if we adjust the diffuse level of our lighting here, if we take this up to 80, we need to make sure that we offset our ambient in order for these two values to equal 100. So we want to set this to 20. Now when you move one, you need to move the other. That's the important thing, in that they must always equal 100%. So let's knock this back down to 60 and our ambient down to 40. Now luminous is going to give our material a luminous effect. It's going to make it look like it's glowing or illuminating from the inside. So if I take this luminous value up to 60, it's going to illuminate. Now, because we're using a transparent material like this water, it may not look all that great. So let's take our transparency and let's turn this all the way down. And you can see now how this is blown out with that color. So let's go to our effects. Let's turn our luminous down to 0. And you can see how that changes it. Now I'm going to turn my transparency back on for my water here. Let's go back to our effects. Now we have contrast, and contrast is basically the setting that adjusts the speed at which the material goes from light to shadow. So with clouds, we would want our light to basically move at a slower pace or at a softer pace. So you see we have soft and hard. So you want to separate these out between soft and hard materials. Now, the next thing that we have is color reflected light, and this is metallic. And what this is going to do is adjust according to our reflectivity. So if I go to reflections and I turn this all the way up, let me go to my color in alpha, and let me just change this to like a red color here, or even just the blue. You see that we have this reflectivity and we have all this blue color here. And with the effect turned on, it's going to make that appear as if it's more like car paint. Let me actually just bring in just a default material right now. Let's right click, reset material, and let me show you how this works this way. It might be a little bit easier. Change our overall color to red. Let me go to reflections. Let me turn that all the way up. Okay, and it appears as though we have this chrome ball. But if we take our effects and we adjust that color reflected, you'll see how that color comes back into that reflected material. So now we have something like a Christmas ornament or something like that. Alright, now let's go and let's talk about the color transmitted light. Okay, so let's turn that all the way down. Color transmitted light is going to work with our transparencies. So if I go to my transparency here, and let me turn that up all the way, and let me turn my reflections all the way down, I have 0 materials here. And actually I do, it's just completely transparent, which means light is passing all the way through it and not bouncing anything back to the eye. So if I go to my effects and I adjust that color transmitted light, you'll see now I have this clear material here. Okay. Now let's go to backlight. Now what this is going to do is it's going to illuminate my object if there is a light behind it. All right. So if I adjust this up here, you'll see that nothing is actually happening. That's because there's no light here. Let's turn our transparency all the way down. We have our object, and backlight would only work if there was a light in the background here. So if you need that, make sure that you have this backlight turned on. Okay. Now you can see that how it's adjusting here. You can see it along the bottom. So if I turn this up to 100%, you can see that effect taking place. Now the next section that we have is called origin of material and velocity of material. Now before we do anything, I want to go ahead and change this material altogether. Let's go back to this default water. Now let's open up our material editor and let's discuss the origin of material. Now these fields on origin of material, notice they're X, Y, and Z. This is going to allow us to offset the material in a material coordinate space. So this allows us to actually position the material on a specific object. Now, what we can do with this is actually animate a material on our object here. So we can do this by setting keyframes and changing the positions this way, or we can use velocity of material and have the material change over time. Okay, so let's discuss how this is done here. Let's close this out and let's open up our animation timeline across the bottom. So we'll do this by left-clicking on our animation icon, and when this animation setup wizard comes up, let's just close this down because we just want to open up the timeline. Now, when the timeline is open, let's take our slider and let's move this over to 5 seconds right here. Now, with this, we're going to open up our material editor and we're going to change the velocity of our material. So let's change this to 5, and as soon as we do that, it's saying you're modifying the material at a non-zero time. So it's automatically saying, do you want to animate this material? And we're going to hit yes. So we have set the X direction at 5, or set the Y at 5 as well. Let's hit OK on this, and let's do a quick preview of this. So I'm going to left click on my preview, and it's going to create one here. That might be a little tough to see, so let's hit escape, and let's right click on that preview. Let's switch the preview size to 4 times that. We'll do a preview frame rate at 5, keep it at preview, and let's hit OK. Now let's left click on that, and it's going to appear a little bit larger, and we should be able to see the water begin to kind of flicker as this is finishing up. Now this is going to take just a little bit of time, so I'm going to pause it and wait for that. So once that's finished rendering here, you can see a preview of this, and you'll notice that we have our water kind of flickering, and that material is moving across this object over time. So that's how we can create an animated material. Now, let's bring up our material editor again, and let's actually close down this timeline. Let's stop that. And let's go up to our material editor, and let's talk about glowing material. Now, in order for this to work, we need to check glowing material. And you'll see right now, I've got a little bit of this haze that has created itself around my material. Now, this will not show up in your scene until you've actually rendered it, and it's going to be a post-process effect here. All right. Now, we can adjust this by its intensity, so how bright the glow is, and then we can also adjust its radius on how far that glow expands off of the source. Now we can have the glow behind objects checked, so that way if anything is in front of it, it will still glow. Now we can uncheck it. If anything goes out in front of it, that glow effect is going to disappear. Now we have global transformations in our effects here. We have turbulence, rotation, and cycling. Now these global transformations are basically going to apply global modifications to our materials. So turbulence is basically going to be using a noise. Turbulence repeatedly displaces the location at which the material or the function is being evaluated here. So if we check this, and then let's turn off that glow there, so that way it's not processing that. And we go to Edit, we're going to get a global material turbulence, and we can adjust its complexity and add a noise to this object here. So if I go to Noise and I do something, we could use anything here. There's a long list. We can go down to the bottom, and you'll see like water troubled. You can add that, and that's going to change that turbulence of that. We can have this blend or we can set it to max and give it even more turbulence. There are several different objects or options that we can go through here. We can scale this, we can set more amplitude here, scale this up even more, our harmonics, okay, and this will change our material. If we adjust our complexity, we're going to get even more out of this material. Okay, let's close that out, and we have rotation, and it's the same thing. We can add a global rotation to our materials. And then we have cycling. Cycling is a little more complex. It's not as self-explanatory as the others. Now what cycling is going to do is it's going to break up that repetitive look of our material. And this is something that we should strive for with like water and that sort of thing, because if you're creating just a body of water, you're going to have different patterns. You're going to have swirls in some areas, you're going to have a current in another area, and water just doesn't look uniform in any way. So the cycling is always a good thing to have on here. Alright, so that's a look at our effects panel, and in our next lesson we're going to move from simple materials and we're going to start working with mixed materials and how we can create those. Now by going through the simple materials with and going through each one of these panels, it's going to help us move a little bit faster when we get into the mixed materials, because mixed materials is going to allow us to mix simple materials together to create one more advanced material. Okay, so we'll get into that in our next lesson.